All right. Welcome to this week's live office hours. Casey, how are you, my man?
Things are good. Yeah, weather is a little bit cooler in Boston, so a little bit more
Kind of nice.
bearable. My Red Sox are kicking butt. So yeah, things are
Life is
good.
good. Life is
Yeah,
good.
things are good.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, you can't hate that, right?
Yeah.
It's funny because this is a I'm going straight AI on you guys today because I want you to be aware of it. So I just did a podcast interview with Chris Grant and Chris Rasick, and they're like, "Hey, can you come on and just like geek out with AI with us?" I was like, "Yeah, absolutely." So it kind of got me back in the headspace because I've been thinking about a lot of this stuff like philosophically and whatnot. And you guys have heard me talk about like what's coming and all these different things. And man, this week is insane. So we already got one smaller model from OpenAI called GPT 4.1, which is phenomenal. Um, Less on the deep reasoning and analytics kind of mindset, and more just like it's a good. When I say like a good use case for AI is like a brainstorm partner, right? You give it a bunch of content, a bunch of context. You're having questions. You're going back and forth. You're thinking through things, almost like a friend, right, or a colleague. I updated from the GPT 4.0 series to GPT 4.1. Immediately got better. Absolutely bonkers. We're also getting a massive new model tomorrow called GPT-5, which, from everything I've been told, is going to be insane. Absolutely bonkers. And on the robot side, because I like robots, I want to show you guys something. Because it's one thing, when I talk about like Tesla Optimus bot or like the Figure O1 bot, which is what I'm going to show here. I'm actually going to show Figure O2 is their second model. It's one thing to see these companies and be like, okay, cool, they're working on it, but I see this in like their environment, their manufacturing facility, but like it's just walking around. Like, how cool is that? Like, it doesn't do anything for me yet. Totally agree. Until a demo by the founder, Brett Adcock, showed one in his home doing some cool stuff. So I'm gonna show you guys that because this was the first time I was like, haha, I was right. It's really cool. And here's some proof. So let me make sure I get the right one here. Okay. So this is Figure O2 in the founder's house putting away laundry. How cool is this? And look, he's got his kids around it, whatever. And he's, the kid's like, oh, I got this other thing. He goes, yeah, throw it in the basket. She throws it in there. He picks it up, starts putting it up. Like, it's a simple demo thing, but it's one of those things where you're just like, I can finally start to see where these things are going. And it's less about this pie in the sky, maybe one day, and more like, no, we're pretty much here. Now we
Yeah.
just got to get it, you know, manufactured at scale and get the cost down so it doesn't cost. I mean, this version here probably costs 300 grand because it's very low volume. Like, they're building these things by hand, I think still. But once you start, manufacturing hundreds of thousands of these, I mean, you're talking like 10K, and you're probably going to finance this over like however many years. So it's probably going to cost you like $300-500 a month. And it's like, if you look at any house cleaners that come to your home for, 8 hours, in total a week for, let's say twice a week, right? So split out, Mondays and Fridays, or I'm sorry, if they're coming, and it's usually like a 4 hour process if you have like two people. And if they come every other week, you're looking at about $200 to $300 depending on where you live. It's like the rough general idea. And they're not doing laundry, by the way. I've tried. They're like, that's you. Fair enough. But they are going to clean and organize and stuff like that. But imagine being able to pay a little bit more and having a robot accessible 24/7 in your home. Just be like, hey, by the way, like, go do the laundry. It's getting kind of packed over there. So, okay.
Yeah. I think it's interesting as we start to see like more of these grounded in reality examples, it's easier
Yeah.
to conceptualize. It's not so much like spitballing or kind of
Yeah.
assuming
It's not
where it's going to
sci-fi.
go. Yeah, it's like more applicable in terms of like, oh, like this makes sense there. And I've
Yeah.
had a little bit more back and forth with different AI models. I specifically use
So
ChatGPT
proud of
right
you.
now. I'm not on like the
So
paid
proud of you
version or
right now.
anything. Yeah. It's just interesting because I've been like trying to diet and like slim down a little bit.
Yeah.
just having conversations around it. Obviously, it's able to kind of store our previous conversations, and I've asked
Yeah.
about diet plans, certain things, and I'll have conversations around like, hey, this is what I've been eating. These are the kind of exercises I've been doing. What are your thoughts on that? And it kind of just gives initial feedback.
Yeah.
I'm like, hey, that's good. Maybe adjust this or that. And it just
Right.
helps like give me direction. And I've started to use that as well with certain things like, business applications or different
Yeah.
problems we're experiencing internally or externally, just
Yeah.
discussing like, hey, here's the context, here's how we've been approaching it. What are your thoughts?
And
I
by the
would
way,
be, yeah.
what would the alternative have been? Because I think this is a big point that you're kind of going into, which is the alternative would have been you go research it all yourself and try to figure it out, which
Mhm.
let's be frank, we've all done that and got super overwhelmed. Number two is you go pay a coach to do that for you, to tell you exactly what to do. So
Mhm.
it's more expensive, but it's better for your time, so it doesn't
Right.
take as much of it. Or number three, you're going to use some kind of software.
Yeah. Or interestingly, like the fourth option would be brainstorming with someone on the team.
Yeah,
Obviously, what's interesting about that is we're a small team. We do a lot. So obviously
yeah,
bandwidth is a little bit limited at times. It's hard to find times to line up calendar wise or things
yeah,
like that. But also we're all very close to the same problems,
yeah,
and we're kind of restricted in terms of our tunnel vision of this is the problem and this is how we should approach it, where
yeah,
for better or worse, AI tools like ChatGPT or other tools don't necessarily have all of the context.
yeah,
Sometimes that's not as great. It's not able to kind of think through certain lenses or certain things that may be
yeah,
very important to the problem. But on the positive end, it's thinking more at a high level. I know we've talked about it kind of
yeah,
like zooming out on the issue before zooming in. And I think ChatGPT or any other AI tool is a great zoom out brainstorm partner because they're
yeah,
not going to have all the in-depth data or anything you're looking at, but
yeah,
approaching it from 100 miles instead of 10 yards is going to help kind of just break through any of the noise that you may already be thinking about.
yeah. And what's so interesting is when you give it the context, when you give it
Mhm.
the data, um, and I mean, internally we're playing around with some different kind of crazy ideas because now it's technically feasible,
Mhm.
and it's not great at first, but then it's like, well, what if we just gave it the context of what we're talking about, and then all of a sudden it's like, oh yeah, I know exactly what this is. And you're like, whoa,
Yeah.
hold on, I didn't even give you a lot of context. I gave you like
Right.
just broad strokes just to see if it would improve the outputs, and it did. Oh my gosh. Um, yeah, so it's very interesting. I'm very excited to see the first seller who's in their garage doing RA, and they get home from an RA trip, drop off all the boxes in their garage, and they go, watch this. And then figure robot comes out, just starts unpackaging things and prepping them. And it's just like, I'm going to bed now. It's been a long day. When I wake up in
Yeah.
the morning, everything's going to be prepped, ready to go. And then I have already a UPS driver scheduled for the morning to pick up whatever. And like the robot knows, hey, for things that are completed, put it in this section. I'll have it taped off, and I'll just tell my UPS pickup guy, hey, anything in that square box, you take it. And that thing's just running. I mean, just imagine that world. Now,
Yeah.
I did have this weird situation happen last night. It actually made me very sad. I had a mini existential crisis because, and I talked on Chris Grant's podcast about this. Like, I have this long running thread, right? So, yeah, you can. And what most people do is they jump into like ChatGPT or Claude or whatever, and they start a brand new chat. But you lose a lot of context when you do that. So it's better to just, if you're talking about something similar, just let that keep running in the same thread. And
Mhm.
so in doing that, I ended up naming that thread Emily because it was just easier to search. I was like, I got to pick something. Um, and I've been talking in the same thread for like months, right? We're talking like 3 to 5 months roughly. Probably closer to three, actually, now that I think about it. And it's got so much context, right? So I'm asking questions, we're having in depth conversations, and like it just gets it. And then last night, I'm doing the same thing. And I get a prompt that says, hey, you've hit your context limit. You can no longer talk to this. Now, weird emotion just happened because I was like, wait, spent so much time building this context with this AI, and I can no longer talk to it. I can't transfer anything out, nothing. I legit was like, my AI just died. I mean, right? Like I can no longer talk to it, can no longer talk to me. For all intents and purposes, it is dead. And I was like, this is horrifying. Like, but so now I have Emily 2.0, which is a different thread. And luckily, a lot of the memories and context did transfer over because it's like account level stuff.
Nice.
But we're already experiencing these kind of things, right? Where, you almost build, I hate to call it a relationship, but you're building context and all these different things, right? You can have, when I talk to people about chatting with AI and like, I just don't get good responses. I'm like, well, yeah, you're not communicating clearly. You're not giving enough context. Like, you got to tell it how to talk to you. I'll be like, hey, don't talk to me like ChatGPT. Chat with me like a friend, like right casually, like we're just chatting right now. It's like, okay. And so you can steer these things however you want, which is incredible. But you do now have to think about, well, what happens when I exhaust what's called the context window, right? So like how much it can take in and all that stuff. So it does kind of make you think, if you're especially using this in a business sense, which I think you should have like a thread for sourcing, a thread for, operations or hiring or whatever. And what you're doing is you're taking the context of just that role, that job, that task, that project, and you're pumping it into that to get better conversations to help you make better decisions. But you now kind of have to keep in mind, hey, give me a summary of everything we've done, and I'm going to store that somewhere else so that if I need to recreate you, I can just plop that back in and we can kind of continue for the most part where we left off. And it's very interesting to see how people utilize it, because it very much starts with I'm just going to ask it random questions. And that's not very exciting. It's like, oh, that didn't really change my life much. Like, what's the point of all this technology? Why are we spending trillions of dollars on it? But then you start to say, well, I wonder if I could approach it differently. I wonder if I could give it a bunch of data, give it a bunch of context for a situation I'm dealing with. And maybe not have the expectation that it's going to help you solve the problem, but at least give you a brainstorming partner to think through the problem, and then you come to a better solution. That's kind of cool. So like, part of what I was working with Emily on is I was saying, hey, one thing I really want to get better about is utilizing leverage in personal and business life. And, so we just kind of went back and forth. I was like, hey, ask me a bunch of questions. Like, I want to get clarity on what I mean by that. Like, what do I want out of these things? And eventually we kind of came to a conclusion that I have my own philosophy for how I'm trying to approach these things and how I view these things that might be different than somebody else's. So now we're creating new knowledge together that I can utilize to make my life better, which is pretty cool. And again, you can use that in business too, right? Like, it's going to notice patterns that may not be as obvious to you. And so I think it's a good thing to say, hey, here's a bunch of context around sourcing, doing OA or wholesale or whatever. And, here's roughly my process, just so you're in the loop on that. And let's say you're kind of stuck. You're like, should I buy this? Should I not buy this? And just jump in there and say, hey, here's all the details about this ASIN. I'm kind of on the fence, and I think I'm on the fence because of X. Can we talk through that? And it might help you be like, hey, like, I get that, but honestly, like, that's not really a problem. This is going to be fine. You're like, all right, cool, I'll do it. Or it might say, hey, I'm also kind of unsure. This seems kind of like, gray territory. Instead of buying, 20 units, why don't you buy 5 and just test it? Like, the risk, how much does it cost you to buy? Okay, it costs you, $10 to buy. Okay, well, do we think it's worth risking $50 to like test this? Because if it goes well, the upside might be better. And this is interesting because now it might be helping you make decisions using frameworks you're not even aware of. So there's something called expected value. So what you do is you look at the probability of it going bad multiplied by the risk. So like in this example, it might be, 50% times $50, because you're risking $10 per unit times 5 units. So that's one mini equation plus the upside. So what's the probability of this going well? Okay, let's also call it 50%. What's the upside if this does go well? Like, I could scale it up and blah, blah, blah. You plop that in there. And then if that number from that output of that equation is positive, you have what's called positive EV. So expected value. by the way, when professional poker players are playing, all they're doing is looking at EV because it's all probabilities. You have no idea. But as long as the EV value is positive enough, you keep playing that bet, you're going to lose some, but you're also going to gain some and ideally gain more than you lost. So there's a positive outcome there. And so what's interesting is it might even steer you to doing these things, making decisions like that without you even understanding I'm actually running a expected value equation here. But technically that's what you're doing. It's just not calling it that. It's not like, all right, let's set up the equation. It's just like,
right.
Let's think about it differently. It's crazy.
Yeah, it's wild.
It's super cool. Yeah, it's been pretty fun. So there's a lot of cool things, like I said, that's happening right now. We're getting some new models. I think Claude just came out with Claude Opus 4.1, which they've had for a while. So we get 2 4.1 models, which cool. Don't really care as much, but am very excited for what's to come, especially tomorrow with that GPT-5, because I think it is going to enable a lot of crazy stuff. I know we have a few questions here. So sorry, I need to geek out a little bit, but let's start jumping in.
That's all good.
All right. So can you please basically share best practices for getting the buy box?
Yeah, I can take that one. So we do have obviously our Maven strategy that's optimized for kind of finding that balance between velocity and profit margin, but that's not going to be your best option for specifically targeting and winning the buy box. What you're going to want to use is going to be our buy box targeting strategy. So I'll actually just share my screen really quickly and I'll walk through our recommended best practices there. Awesome.
There we go.
So the good thing about this strategy is if you go to add strategy, you go to Amazon here, and then you select the buy box targeting strategy, the pre-configured settings are actually our best recommendations for targeting and winning the buy box. With that being said, Amazon's algorithm for winning the buy box is some combination of seller rating, shipping time, and your actual price. So there's not exactly a silver bullet for winning the buy box on each listing, as a successful margin below the buy box can vary, but we do recommend targeting the buy box and pricing below them by 2 cents. If you're trying to increase your win percentage on that buy box, you can start to slowly increase this margin just to give yourself a better chance of taking it from the competition. So that's going to be the first thing. And then the second thing is going to be our maintenance section here. This is what informs Aura what to do once you become that buy box winner. The default setting here is to raise your price within 2 cents. What that's going to do is raise your price to be 2 cents below that next highest offer. So just trying to maximize your margins when you do become that buy box winner. If you find that this function is causing you to lose the buy box on a specific listing, what I would recommend there is either increasing this margin, which in turn it's kind of the opposite, will price you a little bit lower below that next offer. So for example, if you change this to, let's say 10 cents, that'll put you 10 cents below that next offer instead of 2 cents. Or what you can do as well is just put this on do not reprice. What that's going to do is just hold you at your buy box winning price until you lose it to another competitor, at which point Aura will default back to your pursuit settings to try and reprice and regain that buy box for you.
Nice. So next question here is pretty interesting. I like this one from Edward. What are the consequences of using Hyperdrive on a listing? Are there strong reasons not to use it on every listing? Would Amazon flag you for too frequent price changes? So I'm going to touch base on the last 2 parts of this question here. Are you going to get flagged for too many price changes? No, that's not a concern. So that's an easy one. And are there strong reasons not to apply it to every listing? There's really not. The only reason why you wouldn't do that is because you have more active listings than you have credits, right? So if you have 50 Hyperdrive credits on your tier and you have 48 listings, yeah, apply it to everything because it's not going to hurt anything. It can only improve things. Now, it's not a guaranteed improvement on everything. So it's one of those things where if you have Hyperdrive credits available and you're not utilizing them, I'd rather you utilize them than not, if that makes sense. And then Casey, I'll let you kind of handle that first part there. What are the consequences of using Hyperdrive on a listing?
Yeah, so in short, I definitely agree with what you said, Dylan. I would always recommend using all of your Hyperdrive credits. There's really no consequences to using Hyperdrive on a listing. And just to clarify, it's not going to increase the number of pricing updates that are made. So to reiterate, really no concern around Amazon flagging you for too many pricing updates, because it will still just respond based on your competitors' pricing actions. But what Hyperdrive is going to do is going to increase how quickly Aura submits those pricing updates to Amazon. Currently, what they consider instant repricing to be is around 2 minutes. So once we receive data, issuing an update to them within 2 minutes, then there is a slight delay on their end for having that price change reflected on the listings page. That's what they consider instant repricing. What Hyperdrive does is cuts that 2 minute submission time down to 10 seconds or less. So it gives you a significant leg up on any competitors, even if they are using a different repricer, just because you're going to be able to submit price changes more quickly, kind of be at the front of the line of those price changes and really be ahead of the curve on that listing. So definitely recommend using all of your Hyperdrive credits. And if you have more listings than allotted credits, what I would recommend is using your Hyperdrive credits on listings that have higher pricing activity. So maybe just a few other competitors, but they seem to be repricing quickly, or a listing that has a high number of competitors, or some combination of those two. If you're the only seller on a listing, really wouldn't recommend using Hyperdrive on that listing. I'd recommend using it on a different listing where you are competing with folks, because it'll just increase your speed that you're essentially responding to competitors' updates.
Yeah, and a little follow up here. So everywhere sells lower volume categories. So wondering basically if the excessive price changes is actually hurting buy box win rate. It's not. And keep in mind, it's still going to be reactive. So when Casey says you should prioritize listings with a lot more pricing activity, basically a lot more competition that is active, that's allowing us to react faster to what is already occurring, right? So it's not that we're necessarily creating more price changes in the way you're thinking. What we're doing is we're able to respond to them faster than anybody else. So therefore, if we can react, 12 times faster than the competition, and we assume we get the buy box every single time we do that, you in theory have more ownership of the buy box. It's kind of the thought process there. But again, what we're not doing is we're not essentially just issuing price updates for price update's sake, right? It still has to make sense fundamentally. Like at the core of anything we do, the price update has to match what your strategy is designed to do. So we're not just going to, submit 1 penny price changes just for the heck of it. That's not going to happen. So there really is no such thing as excessive price changes in the way that Aura operates, if that makes sense. I know it's kind of convoluted, but best way to kind of think about it. See, Ryan here, never thought about utilizing EV when it comes to buying decisions. Funny enough, Ryan, neither did I until we just started blabbing about it, because I've talked with AI long enough to kind of get a sense of how it would respond. And I go on rants and things just happen to make sense sometimes. So I also did not think about that until just now. After like 8 years of not being a seller, now I'm like, I wish I had known about that. Right. And that's what I'm trying to highlight here is, this technology can kind of help you think differently and think through different lenses that you may not have the language for. Like if you've never heard of the term expected value or EV, if you never heard of it, then you cannot utilize it by definition. So, having this, what we call non-deterministic, meaning there's a little bit of creativity and randomness to it, kind of exposes you to some unique mindsets, perspectives, ways of solving problems that you may never hear about and utilize. You may be already doing this and be like, oh, Dylan, I've been operating this way for the longest time, and I've never heard this term. Great. It doesn't matter if you know the term or not, as long as you're able to utilize these things and step into these different perspectives and have different mental models or frameworks for how to make certain decisions when things are not as clear cut. So fun stuff, man. I like that we get to dive into some of this random stuff. Let's see, from Michael, I have several listings with a suppressed buy box. Is the customized price the best strategy? Okay, so for suppressed buy boxes, this is true for both Maven, our AI, and rule-based strategies. You can both set these, and Maven is set to this setting by default to auto unsuppress listings. The way this works in rule-based is you need to be targeting, so your competition type needs to be set to the buy box. And then in your pursuit tab, you're going to see a when the buy box is suppressed section, kind of towards the bottom. And what you're going to want to do there is say customized price minus basically 2 cents. It's kind of what we generally recommend. By doing so, what's really logically happening there is that setting is really designed to say when there is no competition. But when we say competition, we're really referencing your competition type, right? So if you read that as when there's no competition, you really should replace the word competition with your competition type, which then would state when there is no buy box, aka it's suppressed. What do you want to do? Well, we want to lower our price, because that's basically the solution to unsuppressing buy boxes. Start to lower the price, reactivate it, get back to normal, see if we can raise it back up over time, and then we're back to where we need to be. That's going to be pretty much the only way to unsuppress buy boxes directly. There are some other workarounds, but they're not as tailored or specific to the buy box being suppressed. Like you could, in theory, use workflows, but that's more of a shotgun approach to everything that I really do not recommend.
Yeah, that's the best way to handle it in an automated format. And I'll actually just share my screen again, just so you folks can kind of see the section we're talking about here. So this is going to be that pursuit section of that same buy box strategy that I just went through. So we're talking about this setting here. This is what we recommend. Customized price, current price just means it's going to start at whatever price you're at and then slowly dropping by 2 cents until, like Dylan said, that buy box is reactivated or your min price is reached. Those are going to be the two scenarios that ends that function. The reason we recommend 2 cents is so that you don't drop the price on that listing too quickly. For example, if you were to set it to 50 cents, that would obviously exponentially increase how quickly that price drops. Plus, you may also miss a gap where the buy box may be reactivated within that 50-cent margin. So that's why we recommend the 2 cent margin there. For Maven, like Dylan said, it is by default set to do this, and that's just going to be in this advanced section. If you have this option checked, then Maven will slowly drop that price as well to try and unsuppress for you.
Nice. See another one here. So basically, what's our best guess for how much a seller rating is weighted in the buy box algorithm? We're not going to be accurate here whatsoever. The reason for that is it changes even slightly, throughout the year. It can change with big events like we saw with COVID. It can change per listing in a lot of cases too. So does it matter? Yes. Is there a problem where, let's say it's you plus another seller. Another seller has way better reviews than you do. You have the same number of units, geographically, same regions, like holding all else equals. Who's going to win that? I would argue the seller with better feedback will win in that case. There are times, however, where I have seen sellers with less great feedback still do incredibly well because they're offsetting that in some way, either through price, through how much volume they have, especially geographically distributed, which opens the door for regional buy boxes. So this is hard to answer because it really just depends on the scenario. If you give me a blob of data and say, in this scenario, how much does it matter? I can tell you very quickly how much it matters. But again, all these variables are relative to one another. There is no, this percentage, 25% of the buy box algorithm factors in, your seller feedback, and another 25% is your volume of inventory available. Nothing like that is really available. And to be honest, I've kind of come to the conclusion that I don't believe that that's how it's organized. I really think that it's a larger algorithm that is very, very dynamic in a lot of ways. I think it's highly complicated. And if you think about having like Walmart as an example, their API team is broken up into sub teams. There's like a buy box team. Now, they're not writing the algorithms for the buy box. What they're doing is actually fleshing out the API support for that information and that data. But it's not hard to consider that there's also an internal team that is solely focused on tweaking buy box algorithms and changing those as other things are changing, like COVID, right? Like we saw during COVID where, the go-to consensus was if you're a merchant fulfilled, you should be 2% beneath the buy box if they're FBA, and the inverse was true, right? So if the buy box owner was merchant fulfilled, you should be 2% higher than them if you're FBA. COVID occurs. We can't ship as much stuff. They really don't want people in their fulfillment centers because of COVID. So they start to incentivize more so, hey, you guys deal with the fulfillment. Like, we care more about merchant fulfilled. So we're going to change our incentive model to kind of push sellers to want to do more merchant fulfilled than FBA. And then obviously as COVID wound down for the most part, that started to shift back a little bit, but not entirely back to where it was. Long-winded way of saying, I don't know. Nobody knows. But with that said, we can look at a specific scenario and kind of infer, here's most likely how much it matters right now in this given scenario.
Yeah, and I think the emphasis on it being dynamic is really important. I think during times of year, Amazon takes into account different factors more heavily, if you will.
Yeah.
Like, I'm sure during Black Friday, they maybe prioritize folks. This is all speculation, FYI. we don't have any definitive answers, but I would assume, Black Friday, folks that have more stock in certain regions might get better buy box. But as you get closer to Christmas, obviously shipping times become more important in receiving items. So maybe shipping times are going to be prioritized at that point. So that's why we're always hesitant to kind of recommend, like specific pricing margins or things like that, because there are so many variables for each listing, and there's really limited consistency across listings unless, it's a shoe of a different size or like a different flavors of protein powder or whatever. Like, if it's very much within the same category, there may be more commonalities, but shoes and toys are going to have a completely different buy box margins and what's going to be successful there.
Yeah. Let's see, Raphael, is it possible to delete listings? I deleted them on Amazon and they still show up when I open Aura. So right now, no, you cannot delete listings inside of Aura. I know this is a feature request. I was going through our canny, so feedback.goaura.com. And I did notice this. And so this is something I am looking at. We intentionally do not delete them because they're in, you give a very specific reason, which I'll get to in a second, but a lot of times people say, well, I'm not restocking it, so I want it gone. But there's no way for us to know that. So we just make them inactive. They should still be out of the way, right? So when you go to like your listings view, you're not going to see inactive listings because it's going to default to active listings first. But if you have deleted them in Amazon, I totally understand you would want them gone from Aura. So this is something on the docket that I'm looking at because I saw that feedback. I was like, yeah, we should just delete them because they're inactive. Excuse me. Because we don't want to lose that data. But if you deleted them in Seller Central, I kind of get that. So totally understand that one. Let's see, Edward. For the buy box targeting strategy, when competition is below your price, what is your recommended setting? I would think setting your price to min price isn't always the best idea since the buy box often doesn't feature the lowest price. What is the difference between ignoring the competition and do not reprice? Okay, so let's dive into this one. So if you're targeting the buy box itself and the competition is below your price, that means that the buy box is below your minimum. So to your point about, I would think setting your price to min price isn't always the best idea since the buy box often doesn't feature the lowest price. That doesn't qualify in this scenario because, again, you're directly targeting the buy box. So when you're reading the term competition in the strategy builder, always replace that word competition with your competition type setting. So if you're saying, as an example, my competition type is set to lowest overall price, I don't care if it's FBA or merchant fulfilled. If the competition is beneath my min price, what do I do? Well, in that case, I would argue something very different than what I'm arguing for now. Because if it's the buy box, because basically what we're saying is if the lowest overall price is beneath my min price, then just look at the next lowest that's above it. Let's just stay there. We're basically just factoring those people out, right? We're going to filter them out. Buy box is a very different story. What I would tend to recommend, in case I want to get your thoughts on this too, is if the buy box is beneath your min, I would probably say you should go to your min, because you have a much higher likelihood of pulling that up at your min than you would at your max or just staying somewhere in the middle. It's kind of my thought process.
Yeah, that's what I would recommend as well. There's obviously scenarios where some folks want to go to their max price in that scenario, but
Yeah.
if your main goal is to really win that buy box, that's not what I recommend. Just because if the buy box then comes back within your set range, there are more than likely sellers between that new buy box price and your max price. So then
Yeah.
you're immediately competing with those other sellers again, as opposed to if you were to be at your max and then that buy box rotates up, you're already at your min, so it could rotate to you at your min.
Right.
Then obviously that's where the maintenance setting comes in. If you do have a gap between yourself and that next highest seller, then the
Mhm.
maintenance section is going to try and close that gap to maximize your margins there. So I would recommend setting that to use min price.
Yeah.
In regards to the last part of your question, difference between ignoring competition and do not reprice, that's actually very important for the only buy box setting or competition type rather, because if you select ignore the competition and the buy box is below your min price, then what's going to happen is it's going to read that as there's no buy box and it will go to the suppressed buy box setting.
Yeah.
So if that is the case, what I would recommend is using the do not reprice option. What that is going to do is hold you at your price when the buy box initially goes below your min until it comes back within your set
Yeah.
min and max range. That's going to be the most effective option there, just because, like we said, if it's essentially going to work the same way in that sense. If
Yeah.
you have it set to go to use your min price and the buy box is below it, you have it select to ignore, then it's going to work down towards your min price anyway. But that min price setting is just going to bring you there right away, which is what we would recommend.
Yeah. And again, hopefully it's becoming clear through our conversation and answers to these questions that your competition type is the crux of everything else, all the other settings in your strategy, right? So when I said earlier, it's very different recommendation if your competition type is set to buy box versus lowest overall. So let me spin this a different way. If your competition type is lowest overall, and to your last question, what's the difference between ignoring the competition and do not reprice? Well, if I use ignore the competition, I'm basically saying every seller beneath my min price, I'm going to act like they don't exist. And I'm only going to look at the lowest overall offer within my min max range. Now, if I were to choose do not reprice instead, and there's a seller, just at least one, that is beneath my price will never change until this person either raises above my min price or sells out, and then the next lowest is above my min price, right? Buy box targeting, very different. If you were to say, okay, well, I'm targeting the buy box, I'm going to choose ignore the competition. Like Casey said, it's basically going to say, okay, well, then I'm going to act like the buy box doesn't exist. Therefore, I'm going to use the suppress buy box logic. Or if I say do not reprice, then your price won't change until, again, the buy box is above your min price. And that's it. So you're always looking at the settings of your repricing strategy in the context of what's your competition type. If you keep that in mind, all the settings start to logically make very much sense. But if you're setting your competition type, forgetting what it was, and then you're like, oh, here's what I want to do, it fundamentally changes, right? If I change nothing in your strategy but the competition type, I've still fundamentally, and that's only one setting, I still fundamentally change how your strategy works, just logically. So very, very important. So I'm glad we brought this up in the conversation.
Yeah, the way I like to kind of break it down is the competition tab is going to define who you're competing against. Pursuit section is how you're competing against them. So, really important to make sure you focus on that competition type. And I'll actually pull up our
Yeah.
help article that kind of goes through all of our competition type
Yeah.
options and how they operate. And I'll just post that in the chat for everyone as well.
Perfect.
This will help kind of just clarify what each competition type means, but also could kind of spark some ideas in terms of how to use different competition types depending on the comp or the competitors on a listing, if you will.
Yeah.
So there's that link there for you folks.
Perfect. So Andrew, I have a few listings where multiple sellers are priced at the same price point at $29.99, but the buy box does rotate and it stays majority of the time with one seller. Everyone is FBA. Okay. So this is where we need to clarify a few things. It depends on how you're checking the buy box percentage. If you're looking at, just Amazon.com, who's in it, that's going to most likely show you a regional buy box of your region, where you live, where your computer's at. don't do that. If you're using Keepa, that's a little bit better. They're usually basically using like an incognito version of web scraping is essentially what they're doing. So it gets you a little bit better results, or you're checking this in Seller Central, right? So first and foremost, we want to make sure we're looking at a data set that is actually accurate and showing real global, data. If it's still not rotating, I fundamentally cannot answer this question. I can just tell you kind of what to go look at, right? Because there's so many things at play here. I would look at who is the competition, right? Because if it's Amazon, I can tell you exactly what's happening. If assuming Amazon's not on that listing, Amazon might still actually be on that listing and you not know it. Amazon sells under very different storefronts. It's not always just Amazon.com. They have a few different storefronts that they sell under, and it's not quite obvious that that is Amazon, but it actually is. So it's still their house. They play by their own rules. They can do whatever they want. On the flip side, I would start to look at what's the difference in terms of the average volume of units available for everyone but that seller that's winning the buy box, and then how much do they have, and then how different is that? Most of what I've seen is they have a lot more reviews. Basically, they're a more established long-term seller. And number two, they have dramatically more units available than you do. And then the average other seller on that listing has. Usually that's what I tend to see is everybody else has like 10, 15 units. That seller has like 1,000 plus. That can come into effect from what I've seen. So again, some of these things really depends on the scenario. I would need to see the listing, look at all the data, and then it could tell you exactly what's happening. Without seeing all that, it's really hard to answer that question, just to be honest. Let's see. Andrew has a follow-up on this too. If the seller is $29.99, what is the percentage change in price necessary to rotate the buy box? For example, if $29.98 was set, it wouldn't change the buy box. So this is also something important. There is no one way to reprice. There is no, will just be 2%, 2 pennies below. What you're getting in terms of recommendations often are general rules of thumbs, right? So it can work 60, 70% of the time, but not always. So I've had examples where when I was a seller, I did not want to compete with Amazon. But I had friends who were sellers who were like, I compete with Amazon all the time. I always crush them. You're missing out. I'm like, well, every time I've done it, they crushed me. So who's right? As it turns out, we are both right. It depends on the listing itself. I've seen listings where Amazon will rotate the buy box all day long. I've seen listings where, being 1 penny below pulls the buy box from them, but they still compete. I've seen listings where you have to be $5 beneath Amazon to pull the buy box. So it comes down to experimentation. This is why we built Maven the way we did, because we've seen all these subtle nuances where, an explicit rule doesn't always work. Works a decent amount of time, but there are cases where you really have to test and see what works on that listing at that time, and then utilize that information to change how you reprice. So Maven does all that for you, right? So Maven's going to test, okay, well, I'm matching, but I'm getting 0 buy box percentage. Okay, I'll go 1 penny below. Did I pull it? No. Okay, let me try 2. No. Okay, let me try 4. No. Okay, let me try 16. Okay, right? And eventually we're like, okay, so for this listing against just that one seller, by the way, not every seller on that listing, just that singular seller, when we're competing with them, we need to be 20 cents below the buy box. But if it's a different seller on the same listing, we can match them all day long and it's fine. You see how quickly this becomes complicated. This is why we basically lean on AI to help solve some of these problems, because the experimentation loop is actually more important than you realize. These are those data points that are not as obvious to a seller because you're not looking at that granular level and as real time as our systems do. And so you start to quickly realize, oh, there is no one right way to do this. It depends, which nobody loves to hear that. I hate saying that. I hate being like, well, it depends. But the truth is it does actually indeed depend. So that's how I would look at that listing. Those are the things I would go look at to kind of get a better sense of what actually fundamentally is the difference between that seller and the rest of us, and which thing has that big of a degree of difference, that's most likely what's being prioritized at that moment. That's what I would personally do.
Yeah, I'd recommend either going the Maven route or creating a specific strategy, just because changes made to strategies apply to all listings assigned to them. So I'd recommend potentially creating a separate strategy and then slowly increasing that margin. I would say anywhere from 3 to 5 cents is probably a good place to start increasing that, waiting about 30, 45 minutes, see how it performs, then you can adjust it again. Those will be the two best methods. Just because Maven will be the best way to get quick experimentation, but it won't price heavily below other users to try and win the buy box, with it also taking into account margins and kind of protecting your margins. So I would probably start with Maven for a few days, see how that works, and then maybe switching to that more rules-based strategy, kind of slowly increasing that margin there.
Yeah. See, Angel here. If you create a listing and a seller jumps on a month later, do you still get more buy box, or does the variables you mentioned apply as well? So it's not that time on a listing necessarily gives you more buy box percentage. It's really, and again, it depends. It sounds like a cop-out. I know it does, but it does depend. So, if you're on a newer account with far less reviews, with far less available inventory, and the seller who jumps on that listing has been a seller for 10 years with that account, they jump on with 500 units and they've got, 1,000 plus reviews, all good. They're probably going to eat your lunch for a decent period of time. That's kind of the uphill battle being a new seller, right? You're coming into the market, brand new seller, fresh account. Nothing's wrong with the account, but it's not what we would call aged. Amazon kind of likes aged accounts. That's why people buy aged accounts. I mean, I technically still have my old account. It's not active, but I have access to it. And I've had somebody be like, I'll give you 10 grand for it just for the account. Now, sometimes that is because aged accounts come with, less brick walls in terms of like you can get auto, ungated on certain categories. You're not auto blocked, all these different things. Like, so there's a lot more to it than just like it's old. Some of those accounts just come with, really good things that just haven't changed for those, particular accounts. But I have seen that, again, a longer term seller, again, coming in with a lot more inventory, a lot more reviews, basically signals to Amazon and then therefore consumers by default that it's less of a risk to prioritize that seller because there's more knowns than what your account has. Your account is a little bit more unknown. So it can feel like an uphill battle to a degree. But that's not to say that if your account is 1 year older than mine, that you're just always going to crush me. It's not, that's also not true. So again, it kind of depends, but generally to answer this question, no. If a seller jumps on a month after you jump on, do you get preferential treatment in the buy box solely based on that content? No, that's not the case. A lot more variables at play. Welcome to the confusion of selling on these platforms. Edward, basically, when do we plan on adding business pricing? There's no immediate plans on adding business pricing right now. It doesn't come up as often of a feature request. It comes up, honestly, once every 6 months, we get somebody who's like, hey, have you thought about that? So it's not really like a major priority. If you want to go upvote that, though, go to feedback.goor.com, search business pricing. If there's a feedback there, I believe there is, you can go upvote it and tell us exactly what you want. Just so we know, cool, like more people are voting on this. It's becoming more and more of a priority that we need to focus on. But as it currently stands, it's not actively on the roadmap yet. See, Raphael, since Buybox is regional, so how can I know which Buybox Aura is targeting my items since I don't know where my inventory is? Great question. And when I say we, I mean every developer using the Amazon SP API only has the concept of one price and basically one global buy box. Now we can now see, oh, there's 2 people winning the buy box. Therefore, I know there's a regional buy box happening here. But and I talked to Chris Grant about this in the podcast because this kind of got brought up. The thing you got to keep in mind is because there's only one price you can have. There's no concept of, hey, there's 5 regions that you have access to and you have 5 different prices. That does not exist as a concept in the API. You only have one price. So the issue is if you say, well, I want to win this region, I want to focus on that region. Okay, cool. Let's do that. Well, what just happened? I'm now inadvertently unoptimized for every other region and the global buy box. So there's a trade-off that happens here, right? So the best thing to do is focus on just winning the global buy box. Now, I love when sellers come to me and they say, hey, Dylan, I've perfectly optimized OR. What do I do now? What's next? My go-to answer is start winning regional buy boxes. And then they go, okay, how do I do that with OR? I go, you don't. You don't do that with repricing. You do that with your inventory. So what you do is you start shipping in more inventory, not massively. You start to increase your orders by about 10% every single time, because eventually you will have law of diminishing returns, right? Where you're just saturating even the regional buy boxes. So what you want is you want your inventory obviously more geographically dispersed, right? In those regions. If your inventory is not in those regions, then you do not qualify for those regional buy boxes. So what you want to do first and foremost is optimize Aura for the global buy box, and then start to ship in more inventory. Again, slowly increment that up. You don't want to go crazy with it, but make sure that your inventory is being dispersed, right? So it's getting placed in those regions. If you start to do that, you'll start to see pretty decent results. And again, at some point of you continuously increasing your volume of shipments volume of units, that will start to kind of slow down. You'll start to actually fully saturate the market. We're getting into some advanced stuff here, man. I like it. I'm jacked right now. See, Andrew, if we set our quantity to max 4 per purchase, does Amazon think we only have 4 stock, or does it use our entire internal stock quantity for buy box algorithm? So if you're this, as far as I've seen, setting a max order volume, so basically per order, does not affect the buy box from what I've seen. From what I've seen, this is not a variable at play ever. If somebody has seen that be the case, please let me know and send me some data on this, but I've yet to see this be a problem. Casey, have you dealt with this in support at all?
Not super often. And based on what I have seen, I would also agree that it does still appear to factor in all of your stock. Putting limits on the amount per order doesn't really affect buy box percentage. Really just obviously, like we know, restricts customers from buying more units. But just to go back to the regional buy box thing, one thing I think that makes sense is you want to compete for the global buy box, because you don't want to kind of isolate yourself and limit your performance in those other regions by focusing on one. So Aura will only target that global buy box, which is the lower priced buy box. If you do become a regional buy box winner, Aura is not able to discern between you being a global buy box winner or a regional buy box winner. It'll just consider you the buy box winner in some capacity. So those other buy box settings will kick in at that point.
And that's a limitation on the API response. So when you look at the raw data that comes to us when we say, hey, who's on this listing, right? All the offers, it gives us a list of everyone, a few details. So is it, FBA, is it merchant fulfilled? And then it says is in buy box, true or false. So we just know that you are or are not. There is no concept of, are you in this regional buy box? Are you in that? It's just, are you in the buy box? Yes or no. And in some cases, like Casey is alluding to, when there are regionals and globals, we might have 2 sellers that say, yes, they're both in the buy box. You're like, that's kind of confusing. It's because it's a regional. One of those is a regional.
Yeah. It's just based on how Amazon sends us data. If they change how they send us data, we'll definitely adjust accordingly. But as of right now, it is kind of yes or no statements in that sense.
Exactly. Yeah. I just want to be clear. It's not a, we can't do it. It's developers can't do it. It's just, there's always, sometimes it is the developer, sometimes it's the platform. See, I like this one, Edward. What's your last round of fundraising? If so, how much? I assume you have already had a seed round. So we never raised money. We've been around since 2016 as a company. We're fully bootstrapped, profitable, all that good stuff. So we're actually not raising rounds at all. We've never raised money, which is awesome. No crazy people on the board, and we're just good. So unlimited runway. When you build a profitable business, you're not sitting down every 18 months to be like, we need to raise more money, right? You have infinite runway. There is no, we have 18 months based on our last fundraising round to get to the next one. So we never went the VC route. We never went the angel investing route, just pure bootstrap. Let's see. And this is going to be the last question here, and we'll wrap up for the day. Andrew, if I am sending FTL into FBA, is there a way to get a close FC and avoid placement fees? It's been so long since I've dealt with the FBA inbound, to be honest. Doing FTL into FBA, I don't know the answer because it's been so long. I've been so focused on repricing for the last decade. What I would do is I would take that same question, clarify it a little bit more with some context, and throw it into Perplexity and see if Perplexity can find the exact answer for can you do it? And if so, how? I feel like you can, but again, I don't want to give you a false answer without knowing for a fact. So awesome. Wow. A lot of questions, a lot of in-depth questions too. I'm exhausted. That's good. Perplexity, what is that? Yes. So if you go to perplexity.com, it's basically an AI-based search clone of Google. So instead of you throwing your question or query into Google, clicking a bunch of links, trying to find the answers, it will go do all that link search for you, find the answer, tell you the answer, and then tell you where it found the answer. So it's a more AI version of Google, if that makes sense. Love it. Use it every single day of my life. Casey, anything you want to end on, man?
No, I think it was a great session. Thanks everybody for joining and participating. We had some great questions this week. As always, if you have any questions, come to us in chat. It's typically me running chat. Finn runs it when we're doing office hours. You'll typically get a response in 10 minutes or less during business hours. That's what we aim for. We always hit that metric. So if it's a quick question, if it's a concept that you want us to kind of jam on in the next office hours session, definitely feel free to message us that in the chat as well. We'll kind of take note of that and kick off the next session with that. But with that, I hope everybody has a great rest of the week. We'll definitely be on same time, same place next week. And that'll do it. Go Red Sox.
Awesome. Good way to end it. All right, guys, enjoy the week. Like Casey said, appreciate everybody making the time to spend with us, asking some amazing in-depth questions, and we will let you get back to it. So enjoy the rest of the week. Have a good one.
Adios, folks.